This is my true story. I raised my daughter alone after her mother passed. Every meal I cooked, every coin I saved, every night I stayed awake was for her future. She grew up strong and bright, the reason I kept living when life felt empty. I thought she loved me the same way I loved her. But last night, while cleaning her old room, I found her diary. I thought it would hold sweet memories of childhood. I was wrong. What I read inside broke me completely. Before I tell you what she wrote, tell me where you're watching from, and please subscribe so my story reaches more people. I was cleaning her old room that night, a room untouched for years, still filled with pieces of her childhood, drawings on the wall, an old stuffed bear on the shelf, dust covering the window she used to stare through when dreaming about life. The air smelled like time had stopped there. I didn't go in often. It hurt to remember when she was little, running to me after school, showing me her grades, hugging me as if I was her whole world. But that night, I wanted to feel close to her again, even if it was just through her memories. As I moved her boxes and cleaned under the bed, I found something wrapped in an old torn cloth. Small, brown, worn at the edges. It was her diary. I froze for a second, holding it carefully, afraid to open it like it was a secret from a time I didn't belong to anymore. I smiled a little, thinking maybe I'd find notes from her school days, dreams about her future, maybe even kind words about me. Her father who tried his best despite the world being cruel. For a few seconds, I imagined reading things that would remind me I hadn't failed completely. I sat on her bed, the same one I built myself from leftover wood when I couldn't afford new furniture. I ran my fingers over the diary's cover. Her name was still written on it in her small, neat handwriting. The same handwriting she used when she wrote cards for my birthday. I hesitated. It felt wrong to open it, but something inside me pushed. Maybe I just missed her voice. Maybe I needed to hear her again through her words. The first page began softly, her thoughts about growing up, small things she wanted to achieve, how she wanted to travel, study, make me proud. My chest warmed reading those lines. I thought I'd been right, that it was a collection of her hopes. But when I turned the next page, my smile faded. The words changed. The handwriting was still gentle, but the sentences were heavy, sharp, and full of pain. It started with disappointment. How she wished we had more money, how she hated our small home, how she felt embarrassed when her friends came over. I stopped reading for a moment, trying to tell myself it was just a phase, something young people write when frustrated. But as I kept reading, it grew darker. She wrote that she felt trapped with me, that my poverty made her ashamed, that she couldn't stand seeing me in old clothes, working extra hours just to bring home little. I read her words over and over, unable to believe the daughter I'd raised could feel that way. My hands started shaking. The diary slipped slightly from my fingers, but I caught it again, breathing heavily. I tried to remember all the times she smiled, all the times she hugged me and said she loved me. Was all of it a lie? I turned another page. The words became colder. She said she wished she had a different father, that she didn't want people to know where she came from because of me. My heart stopped for a second. I couldn't read further, but I did. The sentences blurred through my tears, but I saw enough to understand. She didn't see me as her father anymore. She saw me as her mistake. I closed the diary and sat there in silence. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Only the sound of my heartbeat filled the room. That little book in my hands suddenly felt heavier than anything I'd ever carried. I had worked all my life to give her a future, but all she remembered was what I couldn't give. I wanted to stop feeling, to stop breathing for a moment, because every breath hurt more than the last. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in her room until sunrise, holding the diary close like it was a piece of her I could still understand. I kept thinking, maybe I failed her without realizing. Maybe my love wasn't enough. Maybe in trying to protect her, I made her resent me. I didn't know. All I knew was that the daughter I had lived for had written words that made me feel like I never existed. I couldn't stop myself from turning another page, even though every part of me screamed not to. My eyes kept moving, searching for something, anything, that could ease the pain of what I had already read. Maybe there would be a line somewhere that said she didn't mean it, that she was just angry at life, not at me. I wanted that one sentence of kindness so badly, but as I read on, all I found was more distance. She wrote about wanting to leave home as soon as possible, about how being around me made her feel trapped. I kept reading those words over and over, trying to make sense of how love could turn into this much hate. My heart beat hard against my chest. I tried to remember what I did wrong. Was it when I couldn't buy her new clothes for school? Was it when I couldn't afford to send her to that college her friends went to? I always thought she understood I was trying. I never had much, but everything I earned went to her. I even skipped meals when money was tight just to save for her books. Yet in her words, all she saw was failure. She didn't write about effort. She wrote about embarrassment. I felt like my entire life had been erased with a few lines of ink. There were pages filled with her teenage thoughts, moments I had missed, feelings she never shared. She wrote about how she hated our small apartment, how she wished she could lie about where she lived, how she told her friends I was a distant relative instead of her father. That last part made me drop the diary on the bed. I sat there staring at the wall, completely numb. I didn't cry yet. I couldn't. I just sat still, breathing slow, trying not to collapse under the weight of her words. When I finally picked it up again, I turned to a page that looked newer than the rest. It was dated the year before she left home. She wrote about getting a new job and planning to move out. She said she wanted to start fresh, without my shadow holding her back. That word, shadow, cut deep. I never knew I was something dark to her. I thought I was her light, the one thing keeping her safe from the world. I read until my hands started trembling too much to hold the diary steady. My eyes blurred with tears, but I couldn't stop. It was like watching my own heart break in slow motion. Every page took something from me. First my pride, then my memories, then my hope. I thought maybe near the end she would write something softer, something that showed she still cared. But it never came. Even her last entry was cold. She said she couldn't wait to never see me again. I closed the diary and pressed it to my chest. The room around me seemed smaller, darker. I looked around and saw all the things I'd kept for her. Her school medals, her childhood photos, her toys. I had held onto them like pieces of my love for her, but now they just felt like reminders of how blind I'd been. All those years I thought I was a good father. All those years I believed she was happy. And now, one old diary told me it was all a lie. Still, a small part of me refused to believe she truly meant it. Maybe she was just angry at the world and took it out on me. Maybe she didn't realize how those words could kill a man inside. I wanted to tell myself that. I wanted to hold on to any excuse that would make the pain less real. But deep down, I knew those words came from truth. Her truth, not mine. And that truth was that she had stopped loving me long before I ever realized it. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in that room for hours, staring at the closed diary. It felt like a tombstone, marking the death of the bond I thought we shared. I didn't move. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just sat there, surrounded by memories that no longer meant anything. Because once love turns into shame, there's nothing left to save. I sat there, holding that diary like it was something alive, something that could still hurt me even when it was closed. But I opened it again. I needed to understand. I needed to see every word she had written about me, even if it shattered what was left of my heart. The next pages were worse than anything before. She had written that she hated how I looked. She said my old clothes made her feel small in front of her friends. She said she wished I'd stop calling her in public because my voice embarrassed her. Every line was like a knife twisting deeper. I read slowly, my eyes wet, but I couldn't stop. She wrote that she wanted to live in a different house, a better one, far away from me. She said I reminded her of everything she didn't want to be: tired, poor, forgotten. I had worked my whole life so she would never feel forgotten, and yet she saw me as the reason for her shame. I could barely breathe as I read those words. I tried to tell myself that maybe she had written them in anger, maybe after an argument, but there were too many pages. Too many times she had written the same things. This wasn't anger. This was what she really felt. The words kept echoing in my mind. I wish he would disappear. That line broke something inside me. I read it again and again until the words lost meaning. She didn't just resent me, she wanted me gone. The man who held her as a baby, who carried her to school when she was sick, who sold his tools so she could afford her first uniform, that man was now the one she wanted erased from her life. My hands shook as I turned the page, but part of me already knew what I'd find. More blame, more hate, more truth I wasn't ready for. She wrote that she felt trapped because of my love, that my care made her feel weak, that every time I asked if she was okay, she felt suffocated. She said I was too emotional, too soft, too old-fashioned. I stared at those sentences for a long time. I didn't understand how love could feel like suffocation to someone. I didn't understand how kindness could become a reason to run. I always thought being a gentle father was better than being a strict one. I thought she'd see that one day. There was a part of me that wanted to rip those pages apart, to pretend I never saw them. But I couldn't. The pain was real, and I needed to face it. Because if I didn't, I'd always wonder what went wrong. So I kept reading. There was a page where she talked about how she wanted to move to a new city, start a new life, never look back. She even wrote about changing her last name, so no one could trace her back to me. That one hurt the most. A name carries history, and she wanted to erase ours completely. By the time I reached the last few pages, I couldn't stop crying. My tears fell on the paper, smudging her words. I held the book close to my chest and whispered apologies, even though I didn't know what I was sorry for. Maybe for being poor. Maybe for not giving her enough. Maybe just for being her father. The house was quiet, but I could still hear her voice in my mind, the little girl who used to say, "You're my hero, Dad." I wondered when that voice turned into silence, when the love turned into hate. I looked around her room again. Everything in there existed because of my sacrifices. The bed, the desk, the books. They were all bought one by one through years of hard work. I gave her everything I could, but the one thing I couldn't give was what she wanted most: a life without me. That realization broke me. I wasn't angry anymore. I was empty. Because anger fades, but emptiness stays. That diary wasn't just her story. It was the end of mine. When I reached the last page, I couldn't feel my hands anymore. They were numb, shaking, cold. The air in that room felt heavier, like the walls themselves were pressing against me. I sat there, staring at the diary on my lap, unable to move. Every breath hurt. I had faced hunger, poverty, sickness, and loneliness in my life, but nothing prepared me for this kind of pain. This wasn't the pain of losing someone to death. It was worse. It was the pain of realizing the person you loved most in the world was alive but dead to you in every way that mattered. I tried to stand, but my knees gave out. I fell to the floor, the diary slipping from my hands. I pressed my forehead against the cold tiles and let out a sound I didn't know could come from me. It wasn't just crying. It was everything. Grief, regret, love, guilt, all pouring out at once. I had never cried like that in my entire life. Not when her mother died. Not when I lost my job. But that night, I broke completely. Because no man, no father, can survive reading his child's hatred written in her own hand. The memories came flooding back. Her first steps, her laughter. The nights I stayed awake holding her when she had fever. I remembered saving coins in a jar so I could buy her a small birthday cake. I remembered the time I sold my watch to pay for her school trip because she said she didn't want to be the only one left behind. Every sacrifice came back, each one now twisted into a reminder of how little it meant to her. The love that built my life had turned into the reason I felt destroyed. I kept asking myself what I did wrong. Was I too protective, too strict, too poor? I had worked myself to the bone to give her what I never had. I never raised my hand at her, never shouted, never let her see how tired I was. Maybe that was my mistake. Maybe I made life look too easy. Maybe she thought everything came without cost. Maybe she never saw the nights I cried quietly in the kitchen, thinking I wasn't doing enough. I wanted to believe there was some explanation, something that could make sense of this pain. But there wasn't. There was only silence. I sat there for hours, my body stiff, my eyes swollen. The world outside kept moving, cars passing, birds chirping, but inside, everything had stopped. I looked at her picture on the wall. Her smile stared back at me, innocent, young, full of life. I couldn't match that face to the words in the diary. They felt like two different people, the daughter who once kissed my cheek before bed and the woman who wished I didn't exist. I couldn't understand how both could be real. The hardest part was knowing she had written those words long ago, and I never saw the signs. I kept calling, texting, visiting, thinking she was just busy. She'd smile politely, talk about her job, then leave quickly. I thought she was just independent, trying to make her own life. I was proud of her for that. I didn't know those smiles were masks. I didn't know every visit was an obligation. I didn't know I was already forgotten in her heart. That night, I didn't eat. I didn't sleep. I just sat there in her empty room until morning came. When the sunlight finally touched the floor, it made the diary's cover shine faintly. I reached for it again, opened it one last time, and whispered to the pages, "I'm sorry. Sorry for whatever I did. Sorry for being who I am. Sorry for not being the father she wanted." Maybe she would never hear those words, but I needed to say them. The pain didn't fade when the sun rose. It stayed. It still stays even now, like a shadow that never leaves. People say time heals everything. That's not true. Time only teaches you how to hide your pain better. And as I sat there staring at that small book, I realized something. The words she wrote didn't just change how I saw her. They changed how I saw myself. I wasn't the father she hated. I was the man who loved too deeply in a world that forgot what love means. When I thought I had already felt the deepest pain possible, the next few pages of that diary proved me wrong. There, written in her clean, steady handwriting, was something I never imagined my own daughter could think of. She had written a plan, not just angry thoughts, not just frustration, but steps. She wanted to cut me out of her life completely. She wrote about how she could tell people I was abusive, how she could file a false case to get me removed from her way for good. The words didn't even sound human to me. They sounded cold, planned, heartless. I dropped the diary and stared at it like it had just spoken to me. I couldn't breathe. My chest felt heavy, my throat dry. The same daughter whose tiny hand once held mine as she crossed the street had written about sending me to jail. I didn't even understand where that came from. I had never hurt her. I had never even shouted at her. I'd given her every piece of me. I sat on the floor, trembling, reading that line again and again. My mind refused to accept it. I wanted to believe it wasn't her writing, that someone else wrote it, that it was fiction or a bad dream. But it was her diary, her words, her heart speaking in ink. I thought of the last time I saw her before she left for the city. She hugged me, kissed my forehead, and said, "I'll make you proud, Dad." Those words played in my head while I stared at the ones in the diary. "I'll make sure he never bothers me again." It was like reading two different lives, two different daughters, one who loved me, one who hated me. But I didn't know which one was real anymore. The betrayal wasn't just in what she wrote. It was in how long she must have been thinking it. You can't write something like that out of nowhere. It takes time, anger, and planning. That meant while I was busy working extra shifts to send her money, she was busy building reasons to erase me from her life. I felt like a fool. I had trusted her completely. Every time I sent her money, every time I defended her when people said she was becoming selfish, I thought I was being a good father. But now I realized I was just feeding my own destruction. I picked the diary up again, hoping maybe there was some explanation. Maybe she was just writing out of fear or anger. But there wasn't. The pages after that were filled with her plans, how she'd move to another state, how she'd tell people I was a drunk or violent so no one would ask questions. I don't drink. I never did. I couldn't understand why she needed to destroy me to feel free. Maybe in her eyes, I represented everything she wanted to escape: the past, poverty, weakness. And so she rewrote me into a villain so she could live without guilt. That realization hurt more than anything. It meant she didn't just forget me. She turned me into something hateful to make peace with leaving me behind. I sat there with the diary open on my lap, staring at the words but seeing her face instead. The little girl who once said, "You're my favorite person in the world." I wanted to scream, to tear the diary apart, but I couldn't. Because even in betrayal, I couldn't hate her. I loved her too much, even when her words made me wish I didn't. For hours, I sat in that silence, trying to make sense of it all. My mind replayed every memory, her laughter, her hugs, her goodbyes, all rewritten now by her confession. I had always believed that betrayal comes from strangers, not blood. But I was wrong. The deepest cuts come from those who once held your heart with care. That night, I finally understood what true loneliness felt like. Not being alone in a house, but being alive in a world where your own child wants you gone. I didn't tell anyone what I found. There was no one to tell, and even if there was, no one would believe it. Fathers are supposed to be strong, forgiving. But I wasn't strong that night. I was broken. I felt like everything I lived for had turned against me. Betrayal isn't just when someone lies to you. It's when love turns into a weapon and is used against you. And that's what her diary became. A weapon written in the hand of the only person I thought would never harm me. I sat in that room for what felt like forever, the diary still open beside me, the silence almost painful. My thoughts kept circling back to one question. Where did I go wrong? I had raised her with love, not anger. I had given her everything I could, even when I had nothing left for myself. Every piece of food I saved, every hour I worked late, every small dream I gave up. It was all for her. But somewhere along the way, my sacrifices turned invisible, and my love became something she wanted to escape. I looked around the house that night and saw her presence in every corner. The marks she made on the wall when she was a child, the photos from her school graduation, the empty chair at the dining table. Every memory that used to bring me joy now cut through me like a blade. I had built this home for her, brick by brick, believing one day she would bring her own children here and call it home again. Now, the same walls felt like they were laughing at me for believing such a thing. I remembered all the nights I used to sit by her bedside when she had nightmares. She'd grab my hand and whisper that she felt safe when I was near. I thought about those moments and wondered, how can safety turn into shame? How can the same hand she once held become something she wanted to push away? Maybe she didn't hate me. Maybe she hated what I represented: struggle, imperfection, poverty. But I was her father. I thought love was supposed to be stronger than shame. I started questioning everything about myself. Maybe I was too soft, too forgiving, too silent. Maybe I made it easy for people to take me for granted. I never demanded respect. I thought love didn't need it. But now I know. Love without respect is just weakness waiting to be exploited. I let her see me as less because I thought it would make her life easier. I carried her burdens without showing her mine, and maybe that's why she never saw my pain as real. I had hidden my struggles so well that she thought I had none. The reflection didn't stop there. I began to realize that her words didn't only come from her heart. They came from the world around her. Society teaches people to value wealth over love, image over effort, success over kindness. I wasn't rich, I wasn't impressive, I was just a tired old man trying to do right by his child. And in her world, that wasn't enough. The more I thought about it, the less angry I felt. It wasn't anger anymore. It was deep, quiet sorrow for a generation that measures worth by money and not by heart. Still, I couldn't forgive her. Not yet. Forgiveness requires understanding, and I didn't understand how any child could plan to destroy their own father. I tried to imagine what kind of pain or resentment could drive her to write those words. Maybe she blamed me for the life we had, for the things we couldn't afford. Maybe she needed someone to hate because it's easier than hating the world. I don't know. I probably never will. But thinking that way was the only way I could survive the pain without drowning in it. That night, I sat by the window until sunrise. The world outside was quiet. I could hear birds starting to sing, a sound that once brought me peace. But even that morning light felt distant. I thought about all the years I had spent trying to be a good man, an honest man, a father who gave his best. And I realized that maybe goodness doesn't guarantee love. Maybe some people just can't see it, no matter how brightly you show it. I picked up the diary one last time and whispered, "I forgive you someday, but not tonight." Then I closed it gently. Because forgiveness isn't something you give out of obligation. It's something you give when your heart stops bleeding. And mine was still bleeding. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't healed either. I was somewhere in between, a father learning to live with the fact that his love was never enough. That night changed everything about how I saw life. I stopped chasing people's approval. I stopped waiting for love to come back in return. I realized that love, the pure kind, is meant to be given freely, even if it breaks you in the end. And in that quiet moment, I told myself the truth. I didn't fail as a father. I just loved a child who forgot how to love back. When the first wave of pain passed, the questions began. They came slowly at first, then all at once, flooding my mind with confusion and guilt. What did I do that made her hate me so much? Was it something I said, something I didn't say, something I failed to give? I replayed every memory, every conversation, every small moment that could have pushed her away. The truth was, I couldn't find one clear answer. It was like searching for a crack in a mirror when the entire thing had already shattered. I thought back to when she was a child. I was never perfect, but I was present. I worked long hours, but always came home in time to help her with her homework. I taught her how to ride a bike, how to cook, how to face the world with honesty. I wasn't rich, but I gave her love in ways money never could. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe she didn't want love. Maybe she wanted the world, and I was the reminder of what she didn't have. That thought haunted me. I started wondering if I was a burden to her even before she left. Every sigh, every look of impatience, every unanswered message. Were those signs I ignored because I didn't want to see the truth? I realized how blind love can make a person. When you love someone deeply, you explain away their coldness, excuse their silence, and tell yourself they'll come around. I had spent years believing she still loved me, but her diary told me she had stopped long ago. The question that hurt the most wasn't why did she hate me? It was, how long had she been pretending? Pretending to care, pretending to listen, pretending to still see me as her father. That thought broke me all over again. Because I could forgive hate, but not pretense. At least hate is honest. Pretending is crueler. It lets you believe in love that's already gone. I thought about the last time she hugged me. It was short, stiff, emotionless. At the time, I thought she was tired, maybe distracted. Now I knew it wasn't tiredness, it was detachment. She was already gone inside, and I was too blind to see it. I kept asking myself how I didn't notice, how I let her drift so far away. But maybe I didn't want to notice. Because accepting that your child no longer loves you is a kind of death. And I wasn't ready to die. There was also another question that kept echoing inside me. Did she ever love me at all? Or was it all just what children are taught to feel? A habit, not a choice. Maybe she outgrew it. Maybe love fades when dependence ends. Maybe once she didn't need me anymore, the bond simply dissolved. But if that was true, then what is love worth? What good is raising a child, sacrificing everything, if love only lasts until they can stand on their own? That night, I sat on the floor and talked to the empty air like she could hear me. I asked those questions out loud. There were no answers, of course. Only silence. Silence that felt heavier than her words. People think the worst pain comes from what others say, but sometimes it's the words they never speak, the things you'll never get to hear. I'll never know what she truly felt in her heart. I'll never know if she regrets writing those things or if she still stands by them. That uncertainty hurts more than truth ever could. But amid all those questions, a small realization came to me. Maybe I wasn't supposed to find answers. Maybe life isn't about understanding everything that breaks you. Maybe some wounds are meant to stay open so you remember how much love can cost. I realized that asking why would only keep me trapped in the same pain. There was no reason good enough to make her words hurt less. So, I stopped asking why. I accepted that sometimes people change, even those you'd die for. Sometimes love dies quietly, without warning, without cause. I'll never know what turned her heart against me, and maybe that's okay. Because in the end, my love for her wasn't built on her response. It was built on my choice. A father doesn't stop loving because he's unloved. He just learns to love in silence, from a distance. That was my answer, not the one I wanted, but the only one I could live with. After a long night of asking questions that had no answers, I realized I couldn't stay there any longer. The house felt haunted, not by ghosts, but by memories that hurt to breathe in. Every corner reminded me of her laughter, her childhood drawings, her old clothes still hanging in the closet. I couldn't walk past them without breaking inside. So I made a decision. It wasn't out of anger, and it wasn't for pity. It was simply because I couldn't keep living in the same space where love had turned into pain. I packed a small bag, just a few clothes, my old watch, and the diary. I didn't know where I was going, but anywhere else would hurt less than staying there. I sat at the table and wrote her a note. It wasn't long. Just a few lines to say goodbye, to tell her that I didn't blame her, and that she didn't need to worry about me anymore. I told her I'd always love her, even if she never loved me back. I didn't write to make her feel guilty. I just wanted her to know that I was letting go. When I placed the note beside the diary, I looked around one last time. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel like home anymore. Home isn't made of walls or furniture. It's made of hearts that beat for you. And hers didn't beat for me anymore. I turned off the lights and stepped outside. The air was cold, sharp against my face, but it felt cleaner than the air inside. For the first time in years, I felt free. Not happy, but free. As I walked down the street, I kept thinking about what it meant to love someone who doesn't love you back. People think love is about being needed, but it's not. It's about giving without expectation, about choosing kindness even when it hurts. I realized that leaving wasn't an act of giving up. It was an act of love too. Because staying would have only made her hate me more. I didn't go far at first. I rented a small room near the edge of town. It wasn't much, a bed, a table, a window, but it was enough. For the first few nights, I couldn't sleep. I kept waking up in the dark, expecting to hear her voice, to smell her perfume in the hallway. But there was only silence. That silence was strange at first, but slowly it became comforting. Silence doesn't lie. Silence doesn't write cruel words. Silence just exists. Days passed, then weeks. I started walking to the park every morning. I'd sit on a bench and watch families passing by, fathers with daughters, some laughing, some arguing, some holding hands. It used to make me sad, but over time, it began to make me grateful. Because even though my story ended badly, at least I had a story to tell. At least, once in my life, I had known what it felt like to love someone more than myself. Not everyone gets that. One evening, I saw a man teaching his daughter how to ride a bike, just like I once did. She fell, scraped her knee, and started crying. He ran to her, lifted her up, wiped her tears, and told her she was brave. She smiled again and tried once more. Watching that, I realized something important. Being a father isn't about being loved. It's about giving love, no matter what comes back. I may have lost her affection, but I never lost my ability to care. And that meant I hadn't truly lost myself. So I decided I would live quietly, but not bitterly. I would not let her betrayal define the rest of my life. I would not let her hate destroy the kindness that once filled my heart. I knew I couldn't erase what happened, but I could choose what came next. And what came next was peace. Not joy, not excitement, just peace. The kind that comes when you stop fighting for answers and simply accept what is. That decision changed me. It didn't fix the past, but it saved the little strength I had left. I had learned that sometimes walking away isn't weakness, it's survival. And as I closed my eyes that night in my new room, I whispered to myself, I've lost her, but I've found myself again. The first few months after leaving felt like learning how to live again. I woke up every day with no one to greet me, no reason to hurry, no sound of laughter in the house. At first, it was painful. The silence was thick. It pressed against my chest like a weight I couldn't shake off. I missed her voice, even though it carried words that hurt. I missed the small things, the sound of her footsteps, the way she'd hum when she cooked, the smell of her shampoo in the hallway. Losing someone you love isn't just losing them. It's losing every piece of your daily life they used to fill. But over time, I began to notice that silence could heal. I learned to live slowly. I cooked small meals, washed my dishes right after eating, and kept the radio playing softly just so the quiet wouldn't swallow me whole. I started talking to the old man who ran the fruit stall near my apartment. He'd smile, tell me about his grandchildren, and for a few minutes, I'd forget the ache in my chest. Some days, I'd take long walks by the river and watch people pass, families, lovers, friends. Their happiness didn't make me jealous anymore. It reminded me that life still moved forward, even when hearts didn't. Sometimes, late at night, I'd find myself reaching for my phone, wanting to call her. My hand would stop midair, remembering the diary, remembering the words she wrote. I'd put the phone down again, whisper her name, and close my eyes. There's a strange kind of grief that comes from loving someone who's still alive but lost to you. You can't mourn them properly because they're still out there, breathing, living, laughing, just not with you. I tried to forgive her, truly. Not for her sake, but for mine. Carrying anger was like holding a burning coal. The longer I held it, the more it burned me. So I started writing letters I'd never send. In them, I told her everything I couldn't say in person. I told her I missed her. I told her I still loved her. I told her I hoped she was happy, even if that happiness didn't include me. Each letter felt like lifting a stone off my chest. I kept them all in a box under my bed. Maybe someday she'll find them, or maybe she won't. But writing them helped me breathe again. The hardest part wasn't the loneliness, it was the memories. They came in waves, sometimes gentle, sometimes cruel. I'd be drinking tea, and suddenly I'd remember the time she spilled hers and laughed so hard she cried. I'd walk past a clothing store and remember the pink dress she wanted but we couldn't afford. Memories don't ask for permission, they just arrive and demand to be felt. Some nights, I let them. I'd cry quietly until I fell asleep, and in the morning, I'd get up and keep going. That became my new routine. Survive one day at a time. Then one morning, I passed by a group of children playing near the park. One of them fell, and her father rushed to help. He knelt down, checked her knee, and kissed her forehead. I stopped walking and just watched. The scene hit me like a storm, the innocence, the love, the care. It reminded me that being a father doesn't end when your child stops loving you. It's something that lives inside you forever. You can't unlearn it. You can't erase it. You just carry it quietly, like a scar that no one sees. That day, I stopped feeling sorry for myself. I realized that my story wasn't about betrayal anymore. It was about endurance. I had loved, I had lost, and I was still standing. I may have failed in her eyes, but I had not failed in being a father. Love, even when it's one-sided, still counts. It still matters. It still shapes you into someone stronger than you were before. Now, when I think of her, I don't feel anger or pain. I feel something softer. A kind of tired love that asks for nothing. Maybe one day she'll understand what I gave. Maybe she never will. Either way, I've made peace with it. Because sometimes peace isn't when things go back to how they were. It's when you finally accept that they never will. Years have passed since that night I walked out of my daughter's house. Seasons changed, faces came and went, and I grew older in a small rented room that became both my shelter and my prison. Life slowed down, but the memories never did. Some days they came softly, like a shadow that passes by your window. Other days, they hit hard, dragging me back into the pain I thought I'd buried. Yet, I kept moving forward, one quiet step at a time. I started to accept the emptiness. It wasn't my enemy anymore, it became part of me. I learned how to live without waiting for anyone to call or knock on my door. I stopped hoping for a message that never came. Instead, I found small reasons to stay alive. The morning light spilling through the window, the smell of rain on old streets, the sound of children laughing somewhere far away. Those things reminded me that life, no matter how broken, still had gentle corners left to touch. I kept her picture on the shelf beside my bed. I never replaced it with anything else. Every night before sleeping, I'd look at her smile, the one from when she was 5, missing 2 front teeth, and whisper a quiet goodnight. I didn't do it out of habit, but out of love. Love doesn't vanish just because it's not returned. It changes shape, softens, and finds new ways to exist. Mine lived in silence, in forgiveness, in a heart that refused to harden no matter how much it bled. Sometimes I'd walk past her street. I never went close, just far enough to see her life from a distance. She looked happy, surrounded by people, carrying herself with confidence. There were days I wanted to call out her name, to tell her I still thought of her every day. But then I'd stop. She didn't need to be reminded of the man she once called a burden. Her peace mattered more than my longing. So I'd turn away and go home quietly, letting her live free of my shadow. I found work at a local repair shop. The pay was small, but it gave me purpose. I fixed radios, clocks, and old fans that people thought were beyond repair. Funny thing, while I couldn't fix my family, I became good at fixing things that were broken. Maybe it was life's small way of giving me back control. Every time I made something work again, I felt a spark of hope. It reminded me that even broken things can still serve a purpose. The owner of the shop, a kind old man, once asked me why I worked so carefully on things no one else would bother to fix. I told him, because someone still believes they can work again. He smiled, but he didn't know I wasn't just talking about machines. I was talking about people like me, the forgotten, the unloved, the ones who still choose kindness, even after being broken. In time, I stopped keeping track of the years. Age became just a number, and pain became a quiet companion. I didn't hate her anymore. In fact, I was proud of her. She had built her life, found her way, and maybe even found the happiness I couldn't give her. That thought brought me peace, even if it came with tears. A father's heart doesn't hold grudges. It holds memories and prayers. I prayed for her safety, for her success, and for her to never feel the kind of loneliness I did. Now, when I look back, I realize that my story isn't about betrayal. It's about love's endurance. Love that survives silence, distance, and rejection. Love that doesn't ask for anything in return. I lost everything I had, but I didn't lose my ability to love. And maybe that's what truly matters in the end. Because when this life ends and my time comes, I want to go knowing that even after everything, my heart remained gentle. I still visit the park sometimes. I sit on the same bench, watch the same sunsets, and talk to her in my mind. I tell her that I'm proud, that I forgive her, and that if she ever thinks of me, she shouldn't feel shame, only peace. Because love, once given, doesn't fade. It waits quietly, even after the world moves on. That's what I've learned. That's what keeps me breathing. And if I never see her again, that's okay. I'll leave this world knowing I loved her with everything I had, and that, in the end, is enough.